welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des.
Oh, and I'm Tammy. Sorry, everybody. You could tell I was super prepared.
We're so on the ball today. So super excited about the topic we have today. Might as well just get right into it. And, you know, one thing that's come up a lot is I've seen folks post online about this, and I know it's a question I had when I first started out. I think, Tammy, it was something you navigated too, was really trying to figure out, like, how to manage first impressions, first meetings, first client sessions, like all of those big, awkward, interpersonal firsts that like we're very rarely trained for.
Well, and even the training we did do, they ultimately, you just have to jump in the deep end and do it and kind of learn along the way. So there's only so much practice or talking about it or prepping that you can do before it's just like, okay, here I go.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary.
Yeah. And I think the thing is like with all of the practice and stuff, you're doing it with people that like, you know, like if you're in maybe a coaching class or if you're in school and things, then you're doing it with a cohort that you know.
Yeah.
And that makes it a lot easier. And I think one piece that makes it easier is, you know, during first meetings, I guess, there's this internal monologue. Like I have this internal monologue of, well, what do they think about me? Am I being awkward? Like all of this personal, like, self-reflection
Of course.
going on and self-judgment
like
and everything.
Noise. Yeah.
And the thing is like that's not doing anybody any favors.
True.
Like for one, it can make you seem a little self-involved. Because you're like so focused on stuff and like you're not able to like engage
Well, I think
authentically.
So like when there's a lot of noise in your head, people don't see that. But what they may read is, oh, this person is maybe lacking warmth, or this person might be standoffish, or they seem really disinterested in what I'm saying, or you could. People then make assumptions or read it in certain ways that are disadvantageous. Is that a word?
Disadvantageous?
Yeah. I'm saying it's a word.
It's a word.
That it doesn't do us any favors. It's not good for us. It doesn't help kind of put our best foot forward.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And like it's reasonable to be nervous, but like I don't know how to speak to that piece beyond the fact that like everybody feels it.
Yeah, I mean,
and
everyone feels it, and I'm sure I feel 100% positive that we have talked about ways to manage anxiety before, like big first meetings, like
and
doing calming things, setting an intention, power posing if you have to, things you can do to like calm yourself down and make it through that so it's not quite so crippling.
Yeah, and I actually I connected with Bustle about this a while ago. I'm trying to think. I think it was along the lines of like the 15 habits that make someone irritating without realizing it, or like 9 ways to like make people like you or something. Anyways, I talked about this idea of asking open-ended questions and maintaining this just general stance of curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity is so important. I think if you can lean into the discomfort. That's something that a term I like to talk about is when you're really uncomfortable, we have this, and then we'll get to the curiosity part. But when when we're really nervous, we tend to kind of shrink back, right? We pull into ourselves a little bit. So instead of leaning in and going forward with that discomfort, we kind of shrink away from it. So if you can notice yourself doing that and be like, no, I'm just going to lean in and go for it, kind of is kind of another way of saying like, just go for it.
Yeah.
Then you can be curious, right? Like, I'm just going to be really curious about this person. Because that will come across, even if you are nervous. So they might say, oh, she was a little nervous, but man, she seemed really interested in what I was talking about.
Yeah. And the thing is with asking questions, like, that only does good stuff. And I know in grad school, at least my class, so this is like one of the few classes that Tammy and I had that were actually different.
Yeah.
Like we didn't have this one class together. In my basic counseling skills class and in our lab, we, like, one of the biggest concerns is, well, I don't just want to ask questions. I feel like I'm interrogating someone. Which is kind of a common way to feel. And the thing is like, unless you're pointing like a light at somebody and not having like an emotional response or like a facial response and just completely disengaged, people aren't going to pick up on it.
Well, and even if they do, so like ways that I've navigated that, interestingly enough, is to just say, you know, I wonder, I really feel like I'm interrogating you right now by just hitting you up with tons of questions. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
And go from there.
Yeah.
So sometimes even just saying that it feels that way, because maybe they're nervous too and you're nervous. And so like they're not talking a lot and you're having trouble kind of getting that click, that engagement going on. Sometimes even just labeling that can kind of break that tension.
Labeling things can do so much in all sorts of life situations.
It's so true. But we get worried like, what if I say I feel like I'm interrogating them? How are they going to feel about that? Like, is that going to sound okay? Like, we just start to overthink it and get even more in our own heads, where if you're just like, if they say, because what if they say, oh no, actually, you know, I really appreciate you asking me all the questions. I'm pretty nervous. I've had people say that, like, oh no, I'm just really, really nervous. So it's totally okay. And I'm like, oh, great. And then we might talk a little bit more to kind of help, like, what are you nervous about? Like, blah, blah, blah. So it can lead you into other ways and other, lines of not thought, but like other conversation pieces that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Well, I think the thing is like through asking questions, it makes the situation about them. It keeps the situation about them. And people love to talk about themselves.
That's true.
Like, even if you're the type of person, like I would say I'm kind of the type of person where I'm like, well, I don't really like all the attention on me and stuff, but there's no other subject I know better than myself and what's going on. And it's like, I have 5 million surface level things that I can talk about as an easy point of reference. So if someone would be like, oh, how was your week? What do you have vacation coming up? Where have you, like, very surface level questions, it makes it easy. It's everybody's favorite topic. And then they leave that session, that first meeting, that time period feeling good because they spent like an hour talking about themselves.
Well, and talking about things, at least as a therapist, talking about things that are deeply personal and maybe deeply troubling to them, and maybe for the first time.
Yeah.
And, you know, thoughts don't really do us any good swimming around in our head. That's kind of, they fester and they grow and they increase in size and distress. And so sometimes even getting it out in that first meeting, if you're a coach or a therapist, that person will experience like a tremendous amount of relief. But even in social situations, like you were saying, like, I don't like to be the center of attention, but I guarantee you, if somebody's talking to you and asking you authentic, genuine questions with real interest, that you don't feel like the center of attention.
Yeah,
then you don't feel like people are staring at you.
Yeah, it feels natural and organic and fine. So yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially for like entrepreneurs who are like coaches or service-based providers, like health coach, any sort of coaching really, like I don't care what the label is, like one of the most stressful things can be the first meeting. And sometimes people kind of go through it like in the form of like a discovery call, but we all know how I feel about discovery calls. Like one of the most intense times is the first piece, but like one thing is that's why you screen out early. Like that's why you have a very specific like not application form, but like a questionnaire. You know, it's like when you bring someone on, you have an idea and you have time to prep questions.
Yeah.
To talk to like you can make yourself curious before you're like face to face or on the phone with them.
Yeah. And especially if you're early on in your career, like I know like me first year therapist versus me therapist now, like, I'm like, oh, that's so sweet that you thought you knew anything about what you were doing. And like, but you learn that over time. So you learn how to ask those open-ended questions. You learn how to have that curiosity because you've practiced it and you've done it a lot. And I think it is a skill that can be learned. So you're not just relying on like, oh, I'm good with people, or oh, I'm not, or oh, I have charisma, or oh, I don't.
Or oh, I found myself always giving advice to people.
Right.
Like, cool. It's a good start. Cool story, bro. But like, there has to be more.
Right. And so I think prepping in the beginning is really important because you're so fucking freaked out that you need those questions to help ground you.
Yeah.
But over time, as you become more adept at it, better at it, you don't need to rely on that quite so much.
Yeah. And you mentioned one thing that I feel like often gets overlooked, maybe because we're like so in it. But the idea of open-ended questions. Let's define that for folks that are listening because people may not quite know.
So open-ended versus a closed-ended question. So a closed-ended question would be like a yes, or something that has a yes or no answer, or something that has a definitive answer. So like, did you go to the store versus what did you do on the way home?
Yeah. They're super simple.
Super simple. So the first one, did you go to the store? So if I ask you, hey, Des, did you go to the store before we started recording?
No.
Okay, where do I go from there, right? It's kind of like this shutdown piece. And it's not that there aren't times for closing-ended questions. There totally are.
It's for like honing in and like really refining.
Yeah, but if I said to you, hey, what did you do before we started recording?
Oh, I went out to eat. I did these things. Yeah.
Yeah. So then it generates content to talk about. It also gets them talking about the things that are important to them. And you also don't have to, like, I think, like, sorry, I'm kind of forming a thought as I'm saying this, but I think a lot of times as initial therapists, we're like, when somebody tells us something, like, oh, I felt really sad, then we have a tendency to give options like, oh, was it because of this or this? Like we start wondering out loud and trying to solve it when we're really like, oh, tell me why you feel that way.
What was it?
Yeah. So what prompted that feeling? And it puts a lot less pressure on us to be quote unquote brilliant and kind of solve and figure things out like investigators, and gives them the opportunity to really examine what it is they're telling us and pick out the things that are meaningful to them.
Yeah. Like seriously, what and how are two of my most favorite words. And I feel like I use them all the time, every day.
Sure.
Because like, so one thing is like, while we're on the subject of talking about questions, there, aside from like open-ended and closed-ended questions, there are also like leading questions and questions with like maybe like very pointed like reference points, I guess. Like
it sounds like you're thinking of something specific with the last one.
Like I'm thinking of like using the word why.
Oh, so I don't use the word why, I use how come.
Yeah.
Because why does sound like I'm interrogating you.
Exactly. Why puts blame.
Yeah. Or it
like
can
why
it gets people's defenses up, and you could try and say it in like the nicest way possible. Like, why did you do that? Yeah. Like, and you could really just be asking versus, oh, how come? Which one sounds better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I will say Tammy and I rarely use why even with each other.
That's true.
Because it's such a weird word and so inherently negative.
Yeah, it just, no matter how and I played around with like trying to ask it in a fun way and trying to ask it in a serious way and trying to ask it in like a really curious way. And it just comes off as like kind of blamey and like, well, why did you do that? Like, no matter how I try to ask it, it comes off in this sarcastic, like, what were you thinking type way, when that isn't what I mean at all.
Yeah, I've defaulted personally to say more. Hey guys, popping in for a quick question. Do you know your signature leadership style? It's kind of really important to know so you can figure out how you do the thing the best way you can. So, if you haven't already, head on over to DesireeW.com, click on Signature Leadership Style Quiz. It is the blue button, and find out. The quiz will tell you if you are a make-it-work mogul, a benevolent boss, a social savant, the ultimate head boss in charge, or if you are a true classic, well-informed and wise. Head on over to DesireeW.com, click, find your signature leadership style, and let me know what you get. And now we'll get back to the episode.
Oh, you do say more? Okay, I say, oh, how come?
Yeah. I think it depends on the situation, but say more is generally like my default.
Yeah, I like say more too, or tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, because with say more, it's I notice that I want to ask why, and then in my brain, I'm like, well, why do I want to ask that? I need more context. Tell me more.
Okay.
That's my thought process.
That makes total sense, but I think it speaks to also that everybody has their own spin that they put on things. Mm-hmm. So like even us saying like, oh, instead of using why, use how come, and you and I use how come, and you use say more, and it accomplishes the same task. It accomplishes the same thing in a conversation, but it is in a way that feels authentic to me, in a way that feels authentic to you.
Yeah. And I know like some of you guys listening are probably like, well, say more sounds so therapist-y and stuff. Cause like I used to chuckle when I would do like say more, tell me more.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is like, I've really like played with it and kind of taken it on. And it's so cool because people don't expect a statement like that. And if you do it like authentically and showing that you've paid attention, you can feel the conversation shift.
Yeah.
Because, like, I've been in situations where someone said something and I've been like, oh, say more. You know?
And they were probably like, oh, she's so interested in what I'm saying.
It took it to a whole different level.
Yeah. Because you're doing it in a really authentic way that also communicates that authenticity and that curiosity in a way that reaches the other person.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know as a new therapist, you and I were talking about this right before we started recording. Like as a new therapist, a lot of times, like you'll ask a question or you'll say something and it'll come across as really harsh, and you might not mean for it to.
Yeah.
And you also have to learn how to ask things in a way that isn't happening, because no matter how much you don't intend it to, if that's what comes across to your clients, they're not going to come back, or you're going to have to make a lot of repairs, and like it's just not going to go as smoothly as it could, right? And so it's on us as the provider or the whatever you want to call us.
Well, and like
to smooth those interactions.
And the thing is you are a professional, so I don't care how much you want to say, well, I didn't mean for them to feel X. They shouldn't feel X.
But they do.
You led them to perception is fucking reality.
Yeah.
So if they feel that way, then something happened. And as a professional, then own up to it and create space to process it.
Yeah, or if you don't even know, you just feel like something's off, you can be like, I've kind of been thinking about since the last time we met or the last time we talked on the phone. It seems like everything went along really well for a while, and then there was this one point where it seems like feels like we kind of got off track, and I was wondering if you felt the same.
Yeah.
And that can open it up. We don't want to assume, but we just want to label like, hey, this kind of hit me in a weird way, and I was wondering how that was like, what that was like for you. And then maybe they didn't even notice it. Yeah. And so no sense making a whole thing out of it if they didn't, but just inviting them to tell you, or inviting them to join in with you in
or
that.
If they do say something, then you've got to acknowledge that it was impactful enough for them to say something. So don't make it small. I'm not saying like blow it up any bigger, but if they bring it up, then it was something.
Yeah.
And don't get defensive. Keep it neutral as fuck. Like, just going back to what we were talking about.
Be curious.
Tell me more.
Oh, how come? Or like,
yeah.
Oh, you know, I'm so glad that, you know, we're able to have this conversation. And I really wanted to talk to you about that, like what hit you wrong about it or blah, 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 blah. And then you can make that repair, because that's on us to make that repair if it's something, or even if, because we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know, but we need to ask. That's our job.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is to maintain that relationship. Like, so much of, well, therapy, obviously, or counseling or coaching is built on the relationship between you and your client.
Yeah. Or even like, I don't know why today I'm thinking about like design services. I think like I've been working with our designer a lot lately. But even design services, like, the way we interacted during that consult or things like that, like as a service provider, so any sort of service, like it's your job, you're modeling professionalism in this area.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, like we are models. If someone is paying you, your job is to be a model for that.
Well, yeah, because it also shows when you make repairs like that, like, oh, you know, we did have something go wrong. It can be repaired. It's not a catastrophe. And like, oh, that was super nice of you to reach out. Like, I don't know that I could have, like, as a client, maybe they don't feel comfortable doing it. Or like, even, you're right. Like, in business, in any business, whether you're a graphic designer or an interior designer or
a stylist
or a like, you have to have good, strong relationships with your clients. And I think that often, especially, so we focus so much on it in like mental health, because that's our business. Our business is like our relationships with our clients. But when we have additional expertise, like you got me off on the design thing now. So I'm like, when you're a designer and your expertise is in, let's say, graphic design, graphic design school does not teach you how to form strong, solid relationships with your clients and how to make repairs in business relationships and that kind of thing. And so I think that that's an area that's really missing for a lot of folks, because it just isn't taught.
Yeah.
Whereas we are taught how to do it.
Yeah. And the thing is like relationships in business are so important. And even like entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, like if you just work for yourself and you don't have a team, like it's so easy to get caught up in the, well, I don't really interact with anybody else, so why do I need to know those things? That's bullshit, because people are paying you.
Yeah.
Like you have interpersonal relationships. And I'm trying to think about how to say this in the most neutral form.
No, just say it and then we can make repairs.
Well, I'm thinking like, because this is about somebody currently in my world.
Oh.
But I think the podcast may actually be the safest. So, like
I'm sorry. I shouldn't be laughing.
I think the thing is like the relationships are so key, because I can speak to like, it doesn't matter what service you're providing.
Yeah.
If there's no true relationship, because someone's not going to come back. It may be like a one-hit wonder type thing, but then when the contract's done, when the services are rendered, they're going to walk away saying, "Oh, thank God."
Oh yeah,
like, I got this.
Good. Okay, I got what I needed. Like, I'm done with that.
But you're not going to be top of mind. Whereas, if you have a really good relationship with someone, then like that person's going to want to keep you on board. They're going to want to keep you in their world for as long as humanly possible. Even if maybe like results didn't come through the way like you thought they were going to come through, if things have shifted, if there's still the relationship there, I guarantee you the business relationship will continue. Like maybe not immediately, but I'm like, they're my go-to. And that's where you get those like references. That's where you get those tagged posts. That's where the magic happens. It's not through delivering X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. It's through delivering X, Y, Z within the context of a larger relationship. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, even people who might be sitting here saying like, well, I just work for a business. Well, do you have coworkers?
Oh God, you're on a team. Like,
right? Do you have coworkers? Like, think about difficult coworker interactions. Coworkers aren't going to quit just because you guys don't like each other.
Yeah.
You got to find a way to coexist. So the way to coexist is to have some of these interpersonal skills that you can develop and learn in order to kind of smooth those interactions. So like, what if your boss saw you and your coworker having like some terrible interaction?
Or worse, what if you had a really terrible interaction with your boss?
Yeah. Like how do you repair these things? How do you smooth these interactions so that you can be the most effective you can be? And people have, you can't be responsible necessarily for what other people think, feel, and behave, but you definitely can influence that. And one of the ways you can influence it is by having strong interpersonal skills.
Yeah. And curiosity, like, if you're able to control your emotions, like I'm stuck on that really negative coworker example.
Yeah.
Or like really negative experience with like a boss. And I've talked a bit about like my work history and everything. I can say that curiosity is one of the most core pieces that can serve you so well if you're able to maintain like your emotions during like a really shitty interaction.
Yeah.
Because like you can be like standing there seething, and if you can maintain the like, this is a professional environment, I can't say what I want to say, simply asking an open-ended question of like, I'm trying to think, like,
whenever we're put on the spot, we can never think of one, huh?
Yeah.
I know.
Honestly, God help me, tell me more is one of my go-tos, especially in like those really intense situations where you're going off of like, I have very few skills right now. I'm working with like 15 lower IQ points. So like even that, like, okay. Things that I've pulled out in terms of like corporate stuff has been, I am not really clear. Help me.
Yeah. Like help me understand what you need me to do.
Exactly. Help me understand how you're seeing things. Yes, tell me more. Or, oh, interesting. Like even something like that communicates a sense of curiosity that's not necessarily a question.
Yeah.
It buys you time because you don't have to respond. They're going to be talking. They're going to feel heard.
Yeah. And
like,
absolutely. They get a chance to say what they want to say, and you get a chance to understand where they're coming from, and developing that empathy and being able to take their perspective can help you. And even if you don't know what to say, you can always be like, thank you so much for the feedback. I'm so glad you came to me with this.
Yes. Thanks for the feedback. One of my most favorite statements. Thanks so much for the feedback.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's just, it's so good.
And you, in a genuine way.
Yeah.
I mean, because genuinely, even in difficult situations, I am thankful that someone came to me. I may not be in the moment, but you can really grow from that feedback. You can really grow from those interactions. So even if you're not feeling it in the moment, like you can learn to have a larger, more overall thankfulness for that and gratitude that I think can help pave the way to make it through those things.
Well, if someone is coming at you with information, then there's room to be thankful that they aren't talking about you behind their back.
Yeah. Like, thanks for being so upfront with me.
Yeah. And at the very least, they took time out of their day to bring it up. So thanks for your time.
Yeah.
You know, like there are ways to really like take a negative heightened like situation down a couple notches and get space. And so often with interpersonal things, like when interpersonal things go wrong, the tendency is for them to go really wrong really fast. At least that's been my experience in corporate America. That's what I've seen. Or like things will be like subdued until like there's a fucking explosion.
Or it may be because they're getting a lot of pushback from their boss, and so they feel really disempowered, and so it's being pushed down the line.
Yeah.
So I think the thing to remember too is we don't necessarily understand where they're coming from. So I like what you said about like, hey, can you help me understand where your perspective, like I really thought everything was fine. Can you help me understand what's gone wrong? Mm-hmm. Like, so that you can understand, because when you can understand, you can have empathy, like, oh, well, my boss just came and screamed in my face and told me XYZ because this client, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it. There's a huge emergency. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so having more of a greater depth of understanding helps you to have more empathy and maybe not take things quite so personally in the moment, and to start working towards solutions rather than feeling like you have to defend yourself. Not that isn't a legitimate feeling. Like when we feel attacked, like we do feel the need to defend ourselves, and that might not be the best approach in that moment.
Well, reality is perception. Like if you're feeling attacked, then something's going on.
Right.
And you're right. It is just we don't need to like when someone comes at us, it triggers like caveman brain.
Yeah.
Right?
Fight, flight, freeze.
And the thing is like we're not living in those times. So it's learning how to navigate it in a way that doesn't do harm, do harm to relationship, to your professional credibility, to all of those things.
Yeah. So you can navigate it in the moment, right? And this, and what I really hope is that this gives people a chance to feel empowered in those situations, and then to go back later and to think about, how do I want to respond to this? Like, am I like, and then depending on the outcome that you are trying to achieve, you can kind of tailor how you want to move forward in a more deliberate and responsive way, rather than in a reactionary way.
So, boiling it down to be curious, always be curious, own your shit. Even if you didn't think it was your shit, own it, and take time to, like, a moment to pause. All right. I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll talk to you later. All right, that wraps up another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and if you want to keep up with all of my fun day-to-day shenanigans, then go ahead and follow me across all the social media. I am at DezWMsMBA, so DezWMsMBA. I'm talking Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm everywhere. My Insta stories are so good. Also, if you like what we're doing, if you're kind of mediocre about what we're doing, any of that stuff, please leave a review, share it with someone. If you don't like us, but maybe you know someone that may like us, share it with them. Leave a review, comment, all that fun stuff on iTunes. And also, I would like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. And if you haven't already, then go to DesireeW.com, find your legendary leadership style, and let me know what it is, because I'm dying to know. And remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.